No touch, no comfort, but she slept closer each night. Crash landing, the Mojave Desert had always been honest about what it was: hot, empty, and utterly indifferent to human suffering. Jonas Thorne appreciated that kind of honesty. It was why he'd chosen to live here, in an abandoned astronomical observatory perched on a rocky outcrop like a concrete lighthouse guiding no one home. The building had been defunct for decades, its massive telescope rusted into a monument to humanity's brief curiosity about the stars. Jonas had converted the lower levels into something resembling a home, a workshop filled with salvaged electronics, a small kitchen that shared space with his makeshift lab, and one bedroom that doubled as his office. The curved walls still bore faded star charts and constellation maps, though he'd long since stopped looking up at night. He was elbow-deep in the guts of a military-grade scanner when the sky caught fire. The streak of light blazed across the desert horizon, too slow for a meteor, too bright for space junk. Jonas dropped his tools and grabbed the binoculars, watching as the object carved a burning arc through the atmosphere, before impacting somewhere beyond the nearest ridge. The ground trembled beneath his feet, a deep rumble that made his coffee mug dance across the workbench. "Well," he muttered, "that's new." Jonas had learned to be suspicious of new things. New meant complications. New meant people asking questions he didn't want to answer. New meant the possibility that his carefully constructed isolation might be compromised. But curiosity had always been his weakness. It's what had made him a good engineer and what had gotten him into trouble in the first place. He loaded his all-terrain vehicle with supplies: water, medical kit, scanner, and the pulse rifle he hoped never to use again. The drive across the desert took 40 minutes, following GPS coordinates and the faint column of smoke rising from the impact site. He found the crater first, a perfect circle of fused sand and twisted metal, still radiating heat waves that made the air shimmer. In the center lay something that definitely wasn't human technology. The craft looked organic, its hull rippling with colors that shifted between deep purple and silver depending on the angle. Parts of it pulsed with a faint inner light, like a heartbeat made visible. Jonas approached cautiously, scanner in hand. The readings were chaotic: exotic energy signatures, unknown alloy compositions, and something that registered as biological but moved like machinery. He was so focused on the data that he almost missed the soft groan coming from inside the wreckage. The hull had cracked along one side, revealing an interior filled with what looked like crystalline webbing and pools of luminescent fluid. And there, tangled in the organic netting, was the pilot. She was definitely not human, though the resemblance was close enough to be unsettling. Her skin had a subtle blue tint, like looking at someone through deep water, and seemed to catch and reflect light in ways that defied physics. Her hair was white-silver, cropped short and practical. But it was her face that made him hesitate: angular, features that were almost elfin, and closed eyes that seemed too large for her skull. As he watched, those eyes opened, revealing irises that swirled with patterns of gold and green. She looked at him with an expression of weary resignation, as if she'd been expecting this moment for a long time. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place. The words were English, but something about the way she spoke suggested it wasn't her first language. "Depends," Jonas replied, keeping his distance. "Are you going to give me a reason to?" She tried to sit up, winced, and settled back into the wreckage. "I don't think I could if I wanted to. I believe several of my important parts are currently non-functional." Jonas studied her for a long moment. She didn't look dangerous, but then again, neither had Marcus before he'd sold Jonas's entire unit to the highest bidder. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, especially not with someone who'd literally fallen from the sky. "What are you?" he asked. "Injured," she said, "and far from home." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you right now." She gestured weakly at the destroyed craft around her. "As you can see, my transportation has become decidedly non-transportational." Despite himself, Jonas found his lips twitching toward a smile. Whoever she was, she had a sense of humor about her situation, that was either very human or very alien. He wasn't sure which possibility worried him more. He spent the next hour extracting her from the wreckage, a process that required cutting through crystalline supports that reformed themselves as soon as he severed them. She directed him through the process, her voice growing weaker as some kind of internal system finally powered down completely. "My name is Vera," she said as he helped her into the passenger seat of his vehicle. "And before, you ask, no, I'm not going to probe your brain or steal your cattle. I just need somewhere to recover." "Jonas," he replied, "and I don't have any cattle to steal." The drive back to the observatory was quiet, except for the hum of the engine and Vera's occasional sharp intake of breath when they hit a rough patch. Jonas found himself stealing glances at her, trying to figure out what he'd gotten himself into. Her skin seemed to shimmer slightly in the fading light, and he caught glimpses of what looked like circuitry patterns just beneath the surface. "You're staring," she said without opening her eyes. "You're blue," he replied. "You're observant. I can see why your species has made it this far." Back at the observatory, Jonas faced his first practical problem: where to put an injured alien who might or might not be dangerous. His home wasn't designed for guests, hostile or otherwise. There was the workshop, but it was filled with sharp tools and electronics. The main telescope chamber was too exposed. That left his bedroom, which contained exactly one bed and a suspicious lack of alternative sleeping arrangements. "This is my room," he said, helping Vera inside. "You can have the bed." She looked around, taking in the star charts, the cluttered desk, the single narrow bed pressed against the curved wall. "Where will you sleep?" "I'll figure something out. There's room for two," she said quietly. "I don't take up much space." Jonas felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. "That's not happening. I'm not suggesting anything improper, merely sharing a sleeping surface for practical reasons." "No," he said, more firmly than necessary. "We don't know each other. We don't touch. We don't share things. Those are the rules." Vyra tilted her head, studying him with those unsettling golden-green eyes. For a moment he had the strangest feeling that she could see right through him, past his carefully constructed walls and into the places he'd sealed off years ago. "Very well," she said finally. "Your territory. Your rules." That night, Jonas constructed a barrier down the middle of the bed, using spare blankets and a length of metal tubing from his workshop. It was crude but effective, creating two distinct spaces on either side of the narrow mattress. Vera watched him work with what might have been amusement. "This seems unnecessarily complicated," she observed. "It's necessary," Jonas replied. Not looking at her, they settled on opposite sides of the makeshift wall, the space between them filled with careful silence. Jonas lay rigid, hyper-aware of every small sound she made. The rustle of fabric, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the occasional quiet sigh that might have been pain or frustration. "Jonas." Her voice was barely a whisper in the darkness. "What?" "Thank you." He didn't reply, but something in his chest loosened slightly. Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the observatory's old windows and carrying with it the promise of a storm. Jonas closed his eyes and tried not to think about the fact that for the first time in 3 years he wasn't sleeping alone. The barrier between them felt both protective and fragile, a physical manifestation of boundaries he'd spent years perfecting. But as he drifted toward sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had already begun to shift. In the morning, everything would be different. But for now, in the space between sleeping and waking, the wall seemed like enough. The hunters arrived 3 days past before the dream started. Jonas woke on the 4th morning to find Vera sitting cross-legged on her side of the bed, staring at the metal barrier between them with an expression of deep concentration. Her skin had regained some of its luminescence, the circuit patterns beneath the surface pulsing with a steady blue-white rhythm. "You dream loudly," she said without looking at him. Jonas sat up, immediately alert. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," she said quickly, but her voice carried an odd tension. "Human sleep patterns, very intense." He'd been having the dreams again, the ones about the ambush, about Marcus's betrayal, about the teammates he'd failed to save. They'd stopped months ago, but Vera's presence seemed to have awakened them with vivid clarity. Jonas studied her, face looking for signs of deception. "You're telepathic," he said. It wasn't a question. Vera's shoulders tensed. "I don't intrude intentionally. Strong emotions have a way of bleeding through, especially when sleeping in close proximity. That's why you wanted to share the bed. You've been reading my mind." "Not reading," she protested. "Receiving. Like standing too close to a radio tower. Your thoughts are particularly loud when you're distressed." Jonas felt the familiar surge of betrayal, the same cold anger that had driven him to the desert in the first place. He started to get up to put distance between them, but Vera's voice stopped him. "I know about Marcus," she said softly. He froze, half standing, his hands clenched into fists. "Don't. I know what he did. I know why you blame yourself. And I know that's why you built this." She gestured at the barrier between them. "But Jonas, shut up." The words came out harsher than he intended. "You don't know anything about me. I know you dream about saving them every night. I know you wake up wishing you'd been faster, smarter, less trusting. I know the real reason you won't let anyone close is because you're terrified of being responsible for another person's death." Jonas stared at her, feeling exposed in a way that made his skin crawl. "Stay out of my head, then stop broadcasting," Vera replied, but her voice was gentle now. "I didn't ask for this connection any more than you did, but we're stuck with each other at least until—" The sentence was cut off by a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Vera's eyes widened, and the patterns under her skin began flashing in rapid, agitated pulses. "They found me," she whispered. Jonas grabbed his binoculars and moved to the window. 3 ships hung in the sky above the observatory, their hulls shifting and rippling like living things. They were larger than Vera's crashed vessel, with an organic elegance that suggested both beauty and menace. "Who are they?" Jonas asked, though he suspected he already knew. "My people." "The Kithani." Vera's voice was tight with something that might have been fear or resignation. "They've come to take me home." "Isn't that good news?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm engaged to be married to Commander Crix, the leader of the military council. It's a political arrangement, uniting 2 powerful houses, strengthening the alliance, producing heirs with optimal genetic compatibility. Very practical. But you don't want to marry him. I don't want to be a breeding prize in someone else's political game. So I stole a ship and ran." She looked at him, her golden green eyes bright with unshed tears. "They'll drag me back. Force me to complete the bonding ceremony, and I'll spend the rest of my life as a symbol instead of a person." Jonas felt something shift in his chest, the same protective instinct that had once made him a good soldier. He pushed it down, reminded himself that her problems weren't his responsibility. "There's nowhere to run," he said. "This place is too exposed." "I know." Vera stood up, smoothing down the human clothes he'd given her, an old shirt and pants that hung loose on her slender frame. "I'm sorry I brought this to your door. I'll surrender myself. They'll leave you alone." "No." The word came out before Jonas could stop it. Vera looked at him in surprise, and he felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I mean, we need a plan, something smarter than just giving up." Before Vera could respond, a new sound filled the air, the distinctive whine of military aircraft. Jonas cursed under his breath as he spotted the approaching vehicles. 3 black helicopters bearing the insignia of the Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. "Well," he muttered, "this day just keeps getting better." The helicopters landed in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. Soldiers poured out, taking defensive positions around the observatory. Their leader was a woman Jonas recognized with a sinking feeling in his stomach, tall, blonde, and wearing the kind of confident expression that meant trouble. "Nova," he said. Vera looked between Jonas and the approaching figure. "You know her?" She's my sister. Nova Thorne approached the observatory with the casual stride of someone who owned whatever space she occupied. She'd traded her military uniform for a sleek black suit that screamed federal agent, but she still moved like a soldier. Jonas met her at the door, trying to project an air of calm he didn't feel. "Hello, brother," Nova said, her smile sharp as a knife. "Interesting house guest you've picked up." "Nova. Still working for the spooks, I see. Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs now. Very official, very legitimate." She glanced past him toward Vera, who stood frozen near the bedroom door. "We've been tracking the crash site. Quantum signature analysis suggests your guest is from the Kithani Confederation. That makes this a matter of interstellar diplomatic importance." "Meaning what?" "Meaning she comes with us. Now." Jonas felt Vera's tension through their unwanted connection, a spike of fear and desperation that made his teeth ache. He stepped sideways, partially blocking Nova's view of the alien woman. "She's injured," he said. "She needs medical attention, which she'll receive at a secure facility with proper containment protocols." Nova's expression softened slightly. "Jonas, I know you've been out here playing hermit, but this is bigger than your personal issues. The Kithani are a major galactic power. If one of their citizens crashed on Earth, there are procedures. Procedures that involve dissection and experimentation? Procedures that involve not starting an interstellar incident." Nova stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I know we haven't talked since the court-martial. But this isn't about that. This is about preventing a war." Jonas felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the weight of responsibility of other people's lives hanging in the balance. But for the first time in years, he also felt something else, the desire to fight for someone instead of running away. "Give us a minute," he said. Nova nodded, stepping back. 2 minutes, then we're coming in." Jonas closed the door and turned to Vera, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. "You have a choice," he said. "Go with them, or go with your people. Either way, you're probably never coming back." "What about the third option?" "There isn't one." Vera stepped closer, close enough that the barrier between them might as well have been made of air. "There's always a third option. We just have to be creative. They'll scan the building, they'll find you. Not if I'm already dead." Jonas stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Vera's skin began to shimmer, the patterns beneath the surface shifting and rearranging themselves. "Kithani physiology is but flexible. I can suppress my life signs, lower my body temperature, stop my heartbeat for several hours. To their scanners, I'll appear deceased. And then what? Then you bury me, wait for them to leave, and dig me up when it's safe." She smiled, but her eyes were bright with tears. "Unless you'd rather I just left. I know I've been nothing but trouble." Jonas thought about the dreams, about the weight of responsibility, about all the reasons he'd built walls around himself. Then he thought about Vera's laugh, about the way she'd looked at his star charts with wonder, about how the space between them had started to feel less like a barrier and more like a bridge. "The old mine shaft," he said. "Half a mile north. We can hide you there." They worked quickly, Jonas helping Vera down into the abandoned mine while she coached him through the process of simulating death. Her skin grew cold and pale, her breathing so shallow it was nearly undetectable. By the time Nova's team arrived with their scanners, Vera appeared to be nothing more than a corpse wrapped in an old tarp. "Natural causes," Jonas lied, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "She was injured in the crash, internal bleeding, died this morning." Nova ran the scans herself, frowning at the readings. "This doesn't make sense. The quantum signature is wrong. It's like she's fading." "Death does that," Jonas said. "Energy dissipates, entropy increases, basic physics." The Kithani ships landed an hour later, disgorging tall, elegant beings with skin like Vera's but bearing elaborate tattoos and jewelry that marked them as nobility. Their leader was imposing, broad-shouldered and stern-faced, with eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. I am Commander Crix, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience. I seek the female Vera, of House Nethys. She is bound to me by law and custom. Nova stepped forward, all diplomatic smiles and careful protocol. Commander, I'm Agent Nova Thorne, Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. I'm afraid the individual you're seeking perished shortly after the crash. Natural causes consistent with crash trauma. Crix's eyes narrowed. Show me. They gathered around the tarp-covered form in Jonas's workshop, scanners humming and clicking as they took readings. Jonas stood perfectly still, fighting the urge to look toward the mine shaft where Vera lay hidden. Through their connection, he could feel her presence like a faint warmth at the edge of his consciousness. The quantum signature is degraded, one of Crix's technicians reported, consistent with recent death. But sir, there's something else. The cellular structure shows signs of bonding resonance. She's formed a connection with someone. Crix's gaze swept the room, settling on Jonas with uncomfortable intensity. You, human, you were with her when she died? I found her in the wreckage, Jonas said carefully. I tried to help. The bond is incomplete, but present. She chose you as her death companion. This is unexpected. Crix studied Jonas for a long moment, then nodded slowly. By Cathani law, you are now responsible for her remains. See that she is honored. The aliens departed as quickly as they'd arrived, their ships vanishing into the sky like ripples on a pond. Nova's team followed shortly after, leaving Jonas, alone with his deception and the weight of what he'd just committed to. He waited until full dark before making his way to the mine shaft. Vera was exactly where he'd left her, still and cold as death. For a terrifying moment, he thought the deception had become reality. Then she opened her eyes, gasping as her suspended systems came back online. Did it work? She whispered. They're gone, Jonas said, helping her to her feet. But there's something else. Crix said you formed a bond with me, something about death companions. Vera's cheeks flushed with color as her circulation returned. It's complicated. When Cathani are dying, they sometimes form emergency connections with compatible minds. It's meant to preserve knowledge, experiences, emotions, but we're not dying, so the bond is incomplete, unstable. What does that mean? It means we're connected now, whether we want to be or not. Your thoughts, your emotions, I'll feel them more strongly. And you'll feel mine. She looked up at him, vulnerability written across her features. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Jonas thought about the dreams, about the way he'd felt compelled to protect her, about the strange sense of completeness he'd experienced when she was near. Maybe the bond explained it, or maybe it had just given him permission to feel something he'd been fighting all along. So what happens now? He asked. Now we figure out how to live with it, Vera said, together. That night, they dismantled the barrier between them, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Vera curled up on her side of the bed, close enough that Jonas could feel the warmth of her skin and the steady rhythm of her breathing, close enough that the connection between them hummed with quiet contentment instead of fear. Jonas, she whispered in the darkness. Yeah? Thank you. For choosing me. He didn't reply, but his hand found hers across the small space between them. And for the first time in years, Jonas Thorne fell asleep without dreaming of the people he'd failed to save, dreaming instead of the person he'd chosen to protect. Outside, the desert wind carried away the last traces of their deception, leaving only the truth. Two unlikely souls who'd found each other in the vastness of space and decided that some walls were worth tearing down.